A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
Growing up, my relationship with my mom had always been strained, but nothing compared to that fateful day when she barged into my life with a wild accusation that shattered everything I thought I knew about her and myself. I remember the summer of my college graduation, a time meant for celebration, when I arrived home to find her in the kitchen, her eyes intense and wild, as if she had just uncovered some grave secret, and without even saying hello, she demanded to know how far along I was. My confusion was palpable. I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, until she turned to me, her face a mixture of anger and disappointment, insisting that she knew I was pregnant because my body was different, and the heat climbed from my chest to my face, filling me with incredulity as I shot back that she was being ridiculous, that I had been focusing on my studies, my future, and there had been no significant other in my life for months, and yet she wouldn't listen. The more I tried to explain, the more her accusations escalated, and soon I was yelling back, all the frustration I held, years of her controlling tendencies and disapproval, bursting forth like a dam that had finally given way, and I could see the look of betrayal forming in her eyes, as if my refusal to accept her delusions was a personal affront. I finally realized in that moment that this wasn't just about what she believed about me, it was about her own fears, her own desperate longing for a grandchild, and as I stood there, shouting in our tiny kitchen, I watched my mother fall from her empowered pedestal into something akin to a frenzied hysteria, each accusation weaving a web of paranoia around us, as if her belief in this miscarriage of reality was strong enough to infect my own mind. It felt like a waking nightmare, and when I slammed the door behind me, still echoing with the last of my spiteful words, I felt the weight of what I had done sitting heavy on my shoulders. In the following days, I couldn't shake her frantic ramblings from my head, the way she'd cling to me like ivy, whispering about the grandchild I owed her, dragging me to doctors and insisting on tests that only confirmed I was not pregnant, and still she refused to accept this reality, a delusion poisoning our conversations, growing darker, more vicious, each time we tried to discuss it, and I, struggling to maintain my sanity in this chaos, retreated into my room, surrounding myself with textbooks and the thudding silence that filled the void. She took it as a personal vendetta, the walls of our home crumbling under the weight of her expectations until that one particular evening when I overheard her on the phone, something sinister creeping through her words. "She doesn't understand. I'll make her see, I'll do whatever it takes," and with a chill creeping up my spine, I couldn't help but feel like I was watching a horror film unravel where I was both the protagonist and prey. A knot of dread formed in my stomach as nights morphed into frantic dreams, portraying my mother as a twisted version of herself, begging for a child she thought I was hiding, and on the days that followed, I avoided her like a contagious disease, fearing our interactions would snowball into something far worse, until one particularly harrowing night when I returned home late after studying, and I found the house cloaked in an unsettling silence that screamed danger, the kind of eeriness that sent shivers down my spine, every creak of the floorboards amplifying my anxiety. With my heart pounding, I peered into the living room, only to find my bed covered with baby clothes and toys, vibrant hues mocking my belief that I was still free from her grasp, and I felt a scream building up, barely holding it in as I stumbled backward into the hallway, and just then I heard a soft click behind me, the door swinging shut, trapping me in this labyrinth of my home-turned prison. Panic surged through me, every instinct screaming to escape, and as I turned to face my mom, there was a frenzied look in her eyes that I'd never seen before, one filled with an unnerving kind of joy, as she cooed sweet nothings about me finally accepting my role as a mother, and I could hardly comprehend how we had spiraled into this twisted reality, where I was fighting to reclaim my identity, my agency, and I thought of calling for help, but shame weighed down my throat, suffocating the words that could have freed me. Her voice turned soft yet enticing, a manipulation draped in love as she reached for my hand. "Let's decorate the nursery together," the invitation hanging between us like a guillotine, and before I knew it, I was yanked back into the whirlwind of her delusion, where my protests became whispers. This systematic erosion of my autonomy transformed into a suffocating embrace, and it wasn't until I gathered enough courage to break away, pushing past her in a mad sprint toward the door, that I caught a glimpse of my mother, the woman who'd raised me. Morphing into something unrecognizable, a stranger cloaked in obsession, I finally opened the door and gasped in the fresh air that beckoned me towards an uncertain liberty, where the streetlights seemed to cast halos around potential safety. However, even as I fled, a nagging doubt followed, a gnawing realization that perhaps my mother was right about one thing. I wasn't pregnant, but I was lost, shackled by echoes of her incessant demands, and when I reached the end of the driveway, my legs trembling with adrenaline, I looked back one final time, fear and love battling in my chest, and in that moment, I knew that I might have escaped her physical hold, but the emotional tether would haunt me, still echoing in my mind, a question that lingered: am I the asshole for screaming at my mom, or was she never the one who lost grip on reality? It's been years since that night, and though I've managed to build a life beyond the fractures of our past, every now and then, just before sleep claims me, I hear her voice echoing through the years, reminding me of a mother's twisted love, forever intertwined with the shadows that lurk in the corners of my mind. I didn't go looking for trouble when I decided to purchase a laptop on the dark web. In fact, I was just trying to replace my old clunker that had crashed for the last time, but after watching videos about the dark web's myriad of secrets, I found myself beelining toward a marketplace that offered refurbished laptops at prices that seemed too good to be true. I figured it would be a fun little adventure to see what kind of weird tech awaited me just out of reach of the regular internet, sparking the thrill of the forbidden, and with a vague sense of caution, I hand-picked a device being sold by a vendor called Ghost Cyborg. The reviews were stellar, praising the out-of-the-box capabilities and virtually immaculate conditions of the machines. After a few clicks and some godforsaken cryptocurrency transactions that felt almost ceremonial, the laptop arrived a week later. It was sleek, black, and came with a comforting weight that implied durability. However, from the moment I powered it on, a sickly chill crawled down my spine. The screen lit up displaying a mesmerizing array of intricate code running so fast, I felt like I was staring into a digital universe where time lost all meaning. I shook off the feeling, convincing myself it was just an elaborate way to start a system, and once I logged in, the eerie wonder morphed into a mixture of curiosity and mild dread. As I explored the OS designed to resemble a standard interface, I discovered a folder named Special. Compelled by the inexplicable urge to delve into the unknown, I opened it, finding a plethora of encrypted files with bizarre names like Project Necronaut and Eclipse Protocol. Against my better judgment, my finger hovered over the first one and then clicked it, my screen flickered, and the atmosphere in my dimly lit room shifted. Videos began to play in rapid succession, depicting graphic scenes of clandestine meetings and experimentations with subjects too terror-stricken to comprehend what was happening. I knew I should have closed the laptop immediately, but I was entranced, as if the depths of the screen were calling to me in hushed whispers. As I sat there, eyes glued to the chaos unfolding, I suddenly heard a low buzz behind me, as if a hornet had taken residence inside my walls. My heart raced. I turned to find nothing. Just my empty room. When I looked back at the screen, a new message popped up in blocky green text: "We've been waiting for you." Laughter erupted, from where, I couldn't tell, but it saturated the air, echoing like a mockery of my growing fear. I slammed the laptop shut, breathing heavily, but my pulse quickened when I realized the chilling laughter amplified as the laptop remained closed. Against all reason and instinct, I reopened it, knowing somewhere deep down that what I was experiencing was no longer just a glitch. The mockery morphed into quiet whispers of my name, the voices sounding disturbingly familiar like echoes of painful memories, and I quickly closed it again, this time hoping to never look back. No luck. The laptop would flicker to life at odd hours, demanding my attention as if it were a living entity, and pushing me deeper into a spiraling rabbit hole of encrypted codes and monstrous revelations, each click feeling more like a pact than mere curiosity. Sleep became a fleeting luxury. Shadows started moving in my peripheral vision, growing bolder, overlapping with the kaleidoscope of terror that filled my waking hours. Friends noticed my descent, their faces clouded with concern as they asked if I was all right, but how could I ever explain that the laptop knew my name, knew things about me that even I had locked away? The laughter became a soundtrack to my life, followed by those whispers that sent ice through my veins each time I sat down to work. Ghost Cyborg felt more like a master than a vendor. Despite my efforts to cleanse my digital footprint, I felt like a marionette bound by invisible strings, and every time the laptop chimed with a new notification, I felt my sanity dangling on the edge, waiting to plummet. One night, exhausted from weeks of sleeplessness and mentally vacant, I let curiosity get the better of me, clicking on the Eclipse Protocol file, and the world around me began to dissolve. The screen displayed a darkened room packed with churning shadows and a single brightly lit circle where bodies were sprawled, lifeless. Staring in horror, the whispers turned loudly insistent, commanding me to look closer, and as I did, I recognized the faces, the missing people from my town's news reports. I recoiled but was held captive by the image, and the laughter returned, morphed now into screams I could feel gnawing at my senses, demanding to know who I was going to tell, and what punishment I deserved for having intruded upon their space. Paralyzed, I barely managed to shut the lid of the laptop once more, and I made up my mind then, I had to rid myself of it, but every attempt resulted in my efforts being thwarted, doors locking that had never been locked, friends suddenly going missing, shadows forming shapes at night that resembled figures I knew too well. Every action became a frantic dance born of dread, yet there remained something magnetic about that laptop that I couldn't shake. I wanted answers, but not at this cost. Each time my fingers brushed the cold machinery, I was confronted by a tangle of horror and despair that threatened to consume me whole. The last straw came when I caught a glimpse of myself reflected in the screen, eyes hollow, skin pale, a specter of who I used to be. But I was not alone. Behind my reflection, emerging from the darkness, a figure lay waiting, just outside the reach of the screen. It was me, twisted beyond recognition, grinning from within a void that reflected my own terror. With every ounce of strength, I sent the laptop crashing against the wall. It shattered, many shards exploding, but the screen remained intact, alive with that damned laughter, still mocking me. The shadows receded, but I knew it was the calm before the storm. That very night, I heard the whispers again, pleading me to come back to what I thought I had destroyed. Days bled into weeks, my friends became concerned, their voices muffled by the darkness closing in. I cleared my room of anything that resembled a tech device, but their presence clung like a rancid stench I couldn't wash away. I sat in silence, isolation creeping like icy fingers around my thoughts, but just when I thought I might find peace, a knock came at my door. My heart sank as I gripped the edge of my chair, unable to respond, and I heard their voice, Falk, a friend I'd lost to desperation over my descent. I hurried to open the door, but the moment I stepped out into the hallway, I was greeted by an empty floor. And a warning message on my phone: you can't escape what's already inside you. Panic clawed at my throat, my heart pounding against its cage. Then I heard it, the relentless laughter pouring through, coaxing forward like an invitation, making it painfully clear I couldn't escape the story I had unwittingly become part of, and I was left to ponder, with looming dread, who the true monster was, the dark web, the laptop, or the reflection that grinned back at me with an unsettling familiarity. Confession: I left. I left everything and everyone behind me after the breakup. It sounded simple at first, an easy-to-follow impulse born of raw emotion, but what I never anticipated was how truly terrifying freedom could feel. I'll start with the breakup itself, not the typical place you'd think all nightmares begin. After all, I thought, heartbreak was something one could heal from, given time and distance. We had dated for years, woven our lives together so intricately it almost felt like we were one person. Shared house, shared friends, shared future, or so I thought. The end came like thunder on a clear day, swift, unexpected, and it left everything in disarray. "I've found someone else," she said, her voice barely a whisper but somehow louder than a scream in my ears. The betrayal wasn't just in the act but how ordinary she made it seem, like telling someone what the weather was like outside. The shock paralyzed me at first, but as the initial sting faded, a newfound resolve took its place. That's when I planned my escape. I packed a bag with essentials, left a nuanced farewell note not just for her but for anyone who might care, and drove in the dead of night with no specific direction. I wanted to outrun the ghosts of my past, the memories shackling me. I found myself on the serpentine roads of rural nowhere, the night swallowing my car like a forgotten cough in a deep well. I ended up in a town not listed on the maps, its quaint essence almost serene if it weren't for the eerie silence that gripped it like an unyielding fist. Cell service was a stranger here, and for a while, I felt a bizarre kind of peace from disconnection, as if I were in another dimension entirely. My interactions were minimal, mostly exchanging vacant nods with the locals whose eyes seemed shadowed by a history I was yet to uncover. They lived in creaky houses that sat oddly close to one another, like whispered conspiracies. Days dissolved like sugar in lukewarm tea, and I found work at the lone diner, serving slices of pie to faces that never changed, with names I never knew. I thought I'd found solitude. Instead, I had embraced obscurity. But at night, strange things occurred. It began with the barely perceptible, the feeling of an intruder in my new home, though it was just me and the gnarled darkness my sole companions. My belongings would slightly shift, but I blamed the wind or my own faltering memory. Weeks passed, and I became attuned to a sound, a whisper soft as a spider spinning webs in a forgotten attic corner. It spoke my name. No, not spoke, it sighed it. The sound brushing against my eardrums as if apologizing for its intrusion. It was mournful, familiar even, like a voice from a dream only half remembered. Curiosity replaced fear, and I began staying up, waiting for the whispers to return, hoping they'd offer more than just the restless uttering of my name. They never did, not until I was foolish enough to whisper back. My own voice broke the static. Murmur of night, a timid "who are you?" I didn't expect an answer, not in words, but something shifted in the air, a coldness enveloping me that set my skin ablaze. The voice returned, clearer now, threading through a symphony of silence. "You left us too soon," it said. The weight of those words sunk deep into my bones, filling the void loneliness had carved within. I knew then it was her, or something that had once been her, and the others whose lives I had entwined with my own and had so desperately abandoned. The most bizarre part was how I wanted to hear more, to dive deeper into this chilling new reality. It's like grief invited itself to stay, and I willingly handed over the key. Days became indistinguishable from nights. I wandered through the town like a ghost myself, blending into walls lined with the grime of untold time. The whispers intensified, each time edging closer, wrapping intimately round my mind with promises of answers to questions I'd not dared to ask. One cold night, the wind howling with a fury I'd never known, the whispers rose to a crescendo. "You can escape again," they beckoned, letting the implications hang in the air like an unmade decision. Driven by the masochistic curiosity of the damned, I followed the dissonant symphony outside. The townsfolk were absent, their absence making everything feel unfinished. I stumbled through the streets, trusting my feet to guide me as the whispers grew more insistent, their weight inescapable, until I reached the edge of town, blurred by the dawn's first unhallowed breath. There stood an ancient house, its silhouette a haunting figure amidst the crawling mist. My heart hammered inside the cage of my ribs as if wishing to flee this place of woven shadows. It felt alive, watching, its windows like eyes full of accusatory glances. I hesitated, then pushed the door open with the uncertain courage of the naive. Inside, the air was stagnant, carrying the scent of stories incomplete. The whispers wrapped around me in a gentle embrace, carrying me to a room filled with mirrors. Endless reflections mocked me from every angle, twisting into contorted likenesses of every fear I'd known. In each reflection, shadows stood beside me. I watched, transfixed, as the shapes clarified into familiar faces, her face, their faces. My breath hitched, a hot iron searing my chest to life. They weren't just here. They never left. The mirrors buzzed with the electrical hum of anticipation until the glass seemed to ripple, opening a window to the life I had chosen to forsake. At that moment, the whispers quieted, leaving me alone with loved ones I'd discarded. Their eyes were on me, not accusingly, but with a weary kindness that cruelly contrasted the growing dread inside me. Then came the terrible realization of their offer, to return, not physically nor metaphorically, but through surrendering oneself, through becoming part of the echoes. I stumbled backward, panic-inducing a clarity I'd never possessed before. That was their secret, the townspeople, their secret pact of belonging far beyond blood or bond, immersed in a world where whispers replaced what they left. In fleeing my pain, I had collided with theirs. Bolting from the house, an accordion of memories, my footsteps found their beat again in the solid world. Behind me, the house stood still, a subtle promise, a continuous allure. The whispers, though quieted, held me. They told tales of eternity where every departure was welcome into their fold. It was a choice many had made before and would again. But not me, not yet. I returned to the semblance of life beyond the town, carrying with me the weight of their sorrow, brushing against the edge of reality, where echoes become life, reminding me that no matter how far I ran, true escape would only ever bring me into their embrace, where silence once roared. It all started on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday when I walked into that little storefront on the edge of town. The one crammed with dusty antiques and suspiciously glowing crystals. The sign above the door read Madame Celine, Psychic Services. I'll admit, I was feeling adventurous, a little reckless even, and the skeptical part of me brushed off the warnings I'd heard about her dark reputation. People whispered that she didn't just tell fortunes, she distorted them, twisted them into nightmares. The air inside smelled like burnt sage and secrets, and the moment I sat down across from her, I felt a chill scuttle down my spine. Madame Celine looked right through me, her mismatched eyes glinting like shards of glass as she shuffled tarot cards with deliberate precision, and I half expected her to smile, but she didn't. She locked her gaze with mine and told me she could show me a glimpse of my future. My curiosity piqued. I nodded, thinking I could handle whatever she revealed, even if it was a bad dream. I would wake up. As the cards revealed grim and swirling images, she told me, "You'll be alone. There will be darkness where there should be light," and something in the pit of my stomach twisted uncomfortably at the cruel conviction in her voice. It was a vague prediction, but the way she said it dug its claws into my mind and gripped it in a cold, clammy hand. I laughed it off, of course, pushing back the rising tide of panic, but over the next few weeks, as I attempted to live my life normally, That prediction haunted me, the little things, a missed call, an empty table for dinner, my friends canceling plans, that small voice in my head twisted them into confirmations of loneliness, shaping my actions without me even realizing. I found myself shutting people out, withdrawing into myself as I believed that isolating myself would somehow prevent the bleak future from coming to pass. For weeks I spiraled deeper into this self-imposed exile, until one day, a complete stranger reached out to me. His name was Aaron, and he was charming and funny and filled with light, and for the first time since Madame Celine had laid her curse on me, I felt that flicker of hope. We began to talk and laugh and hang out, and soon enough, I found myself head over heels in what I thought could be the start of something beautiful. But one night, while we were out, an odd feeling washed over me, and I blurted, "Do you think we'll always be together?" I don't know what compelled me to ask such a loaded question so soon, but the look on his face sent a shocking jolt of terror through my chest. He laughed it off, then somewhat awkwardly said, "Who knows what the future holds?" And with that innocuous reply, it felt like Madame Celine's prophecy began unfurling once again. It beckoned me, taunted me, and I pushed Aaron away, convinced that I had to protect him from whatever darkness loomed ahead. We arranged several plans that I inexorably cancelled one by one, each time feeling like a lifeline slipping through my fingers, and eventually, he stopped reaching out altogether. I'd packed the memories of our laughter away in the back of my mind, pushing them to the recesses where I wouldn't have to face what I'd lost, until one day while passing a nearby cafe, a glance through the window revealed him sitting there with a beautiful woman, sharing smiles and secrets, a sharp dagger of regret lodging deep into my heart as the weight of my actions crashed down on me. The realization that I had ruined this, that I had severed our connection based on fear of a future meant mere shadows and smoke, became a haunting inevitability, and as the calendar days turned like pages in a forbidden book, I recognized, too late, I would indeed be the architect of my own desolation. I withdrew further, the spiral tightening until it swallowed me whole, and months passed, my friends faded into distant silhouettes, the laughter that once echoed throughout my life dissolved into mournful silence. Late at night, panic would gnaw at me. What if there was no going back? I confided in a couple of close friends via text message, and their worried responses only compounded my isolation because I could hear their concern through the screens. Before long, the replies dwindled down until they stopped altogether. Every howl of the wind outside was a reminder of my solitude, every flickering street lamp became a symbol of my dark fate. One evening, in a fit of despair, I decided I would pay Madame Celine another visit. Perhaps I could glean more details about this abysmal fate she had foretold, and when I stepped inside that musky store, everything felt eerily similar yet poisonously different, like I was walking into my own grave. She looked older, her presence felt heavier, and when I asked for clarity, for anything resembling hope, her laughter turned bitter. "You cannot change fate, you already have, child." Everything in me morphed into a creature of dread as I stared into her eyes, understanding then that the true curse she had delivered was not the prediction itself, but the self-fulfilling prophecy that engulfed me. I had seen my future distort into a lonely existence crafted by my own hands, brandishing my fear like a weapon until it left me utterly defenseless. I turned to leave, my heart pounding in my chest, when she whispered one final thing that chilled my very being, "You can't run from your shadow, you are its master." I never stepped back into the light of that store again. But by then, it was too late. As the weeks turned into agonizing months, I felt the world outside my window shift. The colors dull and fade like a watercolor painting left to the elements. I accepted my fate, playing the lead role in my own tragic story, alone, until one fateful evening, after months of isolation, I awoke to find Aaron standing at my doorstep, a wild spark in his eyes and a determination that stung. "I just drove past," he said, his voice resonating with the heartbeat of the world I thought I'd abandoned, "and I had to see if you were okay." I stood frozen, grappling with the possibility that I had misread everything, that perhaps the shadows had not finally claimed me. He smiled, and for a split second, it felt like time stood still, hope clashed with the distorted echoes of prophecies and all my fears. But I froze, memories of darkness swallowing me whole, the weight of what Madame Celine said imprisoned me, and just like that, I closed the door in his face, my heart rapidly unraveling. It was then that I understood, by fearing the predictions of a stranger, I had become the ultimate prisoner of my own making, and the fate I dreaded most, forever trapped, alone, was now my reality, a twisted reflection of every choice I had made, and I realized, as the last light from the setting sun slipped away, sometimes it doesn't take a crystal ball to see the future, sometimes the only thing you need is a little faith, and I'd lost sight of that entirely. Growing up, My grandmother used to warn me about the dangers of whistling at night. "It's an invitation," she'd mutter, her eyes clouded with a fear I never quite understood. An invitation for them. She never specified who they were, but I chalked it up to old wives' tales. Until last week, it had always been just a spooky story to scare children. I'm a night owl by nature, and my job as a freelance writer keeps me up until the early hours. It was a night like any other, cold and silent, save for the occasional creak of my old floorboards under my feet. As I paused to stretch, trying to shake off the persistent chill that seemed to settle on my spine, I began whistling an old tune. I still can't remember why, maybe out of boredom, maybe because the silence felt too heavy. The moment I stopped, an eerie sensation crept over me, one that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness, a sensation of being watched. Trying to dismiss it, I went back to my computer, focusing on the glow of the screen, convincing myself that the stories my grandmother told me were just figments of her overactive imagination. However, as the clock ticked towards 3 a.m., a time when the world feels both too real and unreal at once, I felt it again, stronger this time. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, my instincts screaming that I wasn't alone in my cozy little apartment. The feeling wasn't just ominous, it was oppressive, like a weight settling heavily on my chest. I forced myself to peer through the blinds, into the darkened street below, bathed in the eerie glow of streetlights. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, the world was as still and quiet as ever. But as I started pulling away, a subtle movement in the shadow of a large oak tree caught my eye. My heart skipped a beat. It was so faint, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Squinting into the darkness, I could just barely make out a silhouette that seemed out of place, too tall, too thin, its shape flickering as if it were fighting to stay within this realm. I froze, my breath caught in my throat as the figure seemed to shimmer with a disturbing elegance, like the air around it was bending or tearing. Logic reminded me that shadows can be tricky at this hour, but intuition, the primal part buried deep inside, screamed that this was the consequence warned about, that I had, indeed, extended an invitation with my thoughtless whistling. I rushed to shut the blinds, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it could wake the neighbors. Sleep was impossible. I sat up the rest of the night, wide-eyed and alert, every creak of the wooden boards below or sigh of the wind through the trees setting my nerves blazing. Morning light brought the illusion of safety, and as banal daily life took over, I could almost convince myself it was a dream, my imagination fueled by fatigue and perhaps a touch too much late-night coffee. Nonetheless, unease lurked at the back of my mind, it niggled at me throughout the day, refusing to let go. By nightfall, I ensured the curtains were tightly drawn before dusk settled. But when silence descended, the specter of my past transgression loomed larger, overshadowing any sense of peace. Urged by a mix of dread and curiosity, I attempted to busy myself with chores. As I moved through my apartment, though, the feeling that unfriendly eyes were upon me grew stronger with each passing hour, often throwing glances over my shoulder at imagined movements in the corners of my vision. It was as if I was being studied, weighed, and measured by unseen presence or presences. My grandmother's words, which I'd considered nothing more than folklore, twisted into chains of anxiety around my stomach. In the days that followed, small things began to happen, escalating my unease into outright terror. Each morning, I'd find the curtains in my living room drawn open, as if someone, or something, wanted to gaze inside, to confirm its interest. Objects around the apartment would move from their usual spots, subtle enough to question my sanity yet brazen enough to kindle fear. I started hearing low whistling outside my windows at odd hours, a lilting melody that was both beautiful and menacing in its simplicity, echoing just faintly yet clearly enough to cut through the night's silence. The last straw came on a night when I decided to ignore the sound, lying in bed with a pillow over my head, when my phone buzzed fiercely on my bedside table. It was an unknown number, and though every rational part of my mind urged me not to pick up, the trembling part of me needed to know. Hesitantly, I answered, and the low whistle spilled into my ear like poison, the exact tune I had whistled days ago, perfected and chilling. I disconnected the call with shaky hands, only for it to ring again. Moments later, I threw the phone into the bottom drawer of my closet, muffling the sound, but the tune still echoed in my mind. That night, I barely slept, fear too palpable to allow me even a moment's respite. I knew I was past the point of no return. Somewhere out there, I had beckoned a watcher, and it had accepted my summons. In desperation, I visited my grandmother, seeking the wisdom I had so easily dismissed. Her eyes tightened when I told her what happened, and her lips pressed into a grim line. She reached for an old leather-bound book, one that felt heavy with an age-old knowledge even before she cracked it open. Inside, written in faded ink, were symbols and tales far too ancient and daunting for a casual reader. She spoke of rituals, ways to appease those whose attention I had unwittingly captured. They are drawn to sound, to rhythm. You must give them a song with no ending. A tune that loops back onto itself, without a beginning or end, until it lulls them away, she advised, urgency creasing her features. Armed with this strange knowledge, I went back home, unsure yet determined. As twilight crept through the cracks and porch lights flickered on like guardians of the mundane, I sat with my old guitar, tuning its strings carefully. I played and played, almost trance-like, weaving melodies that blended and twisted into each other seamlessly. Hours merged as I soldiered on, fingers raw and heart pounding. At times, I felt eyes on me, soft, almost gentle in comparison to the earlier oppressive scrutiny. I didn't stop, not until the sky began bruising with dawn and the melody finally sunk into a rhythmic murmur forgotten by the night. Exhaustion claimed me, yet, for the first time in days, I managed sleep. When I awoke, clarity and a sense of calm descended upon the apartment, as if whatever was watching me had let go. The shadows no longer seemed to bear weight. The objects remained in place, the curtain stayed drawn. It was over, or so I hoped. I never whistled at night again, and neither should you, for there are watchers in the midnight shadows, and sometimes an invitation doesn't take words at all. For weeks, I had been seeing it, a color so profound and strange that I could scarcely put it into words, more a vibration than a shade, pulsing in my peripheral vision just at the edge of consciousness, a hazy, elusive hue that felt alive and beckoned me deeper into its embrace like a siren's call in the dead of night. At first, I thought I was losing my mind, that the late nights and endless cups of coffee had finally cracked some unseen dam in my brain, but the more I tried to dismiss it as mere hallucination, the more insistent it became, shimmering like a mirage, always just out of reach, lurking in the backgrounds of my day-to-day life. It began on an ordinary Tuesday, when I was engrossed in a mundane task at my job in the old library, dusty and dimly lit, and I caught a glimpse of it out of the corner of my eye, undulating softly between the stacks. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing there, only shelves filled with ancient tomes that creaked and sighed like they were alive. As the days passed, I found myself drawn to it more and more. I spent hours wandering the library after hours, the quiet halls echoing with my footsteps, chasing the ethereal color that pulsed and shimmered between the books, as if it were waiting for me to recognize it, to give it a name. I tried telling my friends, but they left it off, claiming it was just my imagination, perhaps a side effect of too much caffeine, but what did they know? I could feel it pulling at my very essence, a magnetic force binding me to its otherworldly presence, urging me to come closer, to explore its depths. I was no longer just a passive observer but a willing participant in this strange game of grab and seek. One evening, as rain lashed against the library's windows and the shadows deepened into darkness, I finally succumbed to the pull, losing myself in the labyrinth of aisles, the soft whispers of ink and paper guiding me. My heart raced as I turned a corner, and there it was, vibrating on a dusty tome hastily left on a nearby table, the strange color more vivid than ever, a hypnotic swirl that defied description, and at that moment, I felt the sheer weight of its significance as though it were a cipher I was meant to decode. Just then, everything fell quiet, profoundly still, and in the silence, I could almost hear it calling my name, wrapping me in a shroud of inexplicable warmth and dread. I was terrified and exhilarated all at once, drawn closer until I grasped the book, my fingers trembling with anticipation. As I opened the cover, my sanity teetering on a ledge, the air thickened, and my heart pounded like a war drum as I began to read words that seemed to shift and writhe beneath my gaze. They told stories of a realm unseen, where that indescribable color was a pathway to the unknown, alluring, and sinister, revealing an ancient power that demanded homage, a world teeming with fever dreams and night terrors, where the color whispered secrets only to those desperate enough to follow. Each line I read seemed to unlock new depths within my mind, filling me with a hunger I couldn't explain, like I was being siphoned into a whirlpool of possibility, the library around me fading into an ephemeral existence, until all that remained was me and that color, my body trembling with the shared pull of our infinite connection. And then, just as I felt the fragile thread of reality begin to snap, the whispers morphed into a command, a primal urge that surged through my veins, urging me to follow, to leave the library walls behind, to seek this unseen world, and deepen into its embrace. The very idea terrified me, making my skin crawl, but that color burned brighter, vibrant as a supernova as it wrapped around my soul like a lover, promising enlightenment or oblivion, an escape far greater than the monotony of my mundane life. I stumbled backward, the book slipping from my grasp as a cold sweat coated my brow, reality warped as the shadows began to coalesce into forms, dark figures shaped like twisted interpretations of people I knew and loved, my friends, my family, their mouths carved into haunting smiles that chilled me to my core, and somehow, I knew they had come to warn me, but I could barely hear them over the clamoring of the color, drowning their voices in a cacophony of want. My mind was a battlefield, battling between the siren call of the void and the pleading faces that surrounded me, but the truth was that I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant for more than this life, that perhaps whatever awaited me on the other side of that color could unveil forgotten truths. And so, I broke free of their tether, cursed that whispering color too captivating to resist, and drove myself forward toward ultimate revelation, allowing the indescribable to swallow me whole, even as the screaming faces faded into nothingness behind me, as I stepped into a world fluid and unbound, where my identity began to erode beneath the weight of the infinite. All I could do was surrender to the madness, wrapped in the embrace of that color, and follow it into the labyrinth of creation or madness. It was the hottest summer day we'd had all year when my so-called friend Lisa asked me to accompany her to the county fair. I should have known something was off when she insisted we ditch our group and go alone. Just us and the blazing sun, dragging our shoes through melting asphalt as vapors seemed to rise like ghostly fingers around us. After a couple of hours enduring the heat and overpriced rides that seemed to spin on forever, I found solace in the form of a shimmering ice cream truck, its presence a beacon of hope in the undulating waves of heat. I splurged on a double scoop of cookies and cream, the cold sweetness melting perfectly against my tongue, easing the fire that lived in my chest. Lisa had scoffed at the idea, her face twisted in mock disgust as she turned down my offer to get her a cone. "I can't bear the calories," she said, inspecting her reflection in the small mirror she always carried. But now, as we strolled past the Ferris wheel, its chains groaning like echoing whale songs caught in storms, she changed her tune. "Let me have a lick," she said suddenly, her eyes glinting in a way that made my grip on the cone tighten involuntarily. Perhaps it was the outlandish request or the way she said it, half command, half supernatural demand, but a chill snaked down my spine not unlike the frost of the treat I held. "No," I said simply, with a laugh I hoped sounded nonchalant, but in truth, her bizarre entitlement to my dessert had triggered a primal sense of protectiveness over such an innocent pleasure. Her smile faltered slightly, a storm brewing beneath her mascara-laden lashes. A rustle of whispers seemed to swirl between us, though the fairground was sparse, nearly deserted but for the echoes of distant screams of joy and terror from the rickety roller coaster. It was as if the air hung heavy and pregnant with something unsaid. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice lilting upwards like the cracked notes of an untuned piano. "It's just one lick, don't be such a control freak." But beneath her words lay an undercurrent I'd never noticed, and suddenly the world seemed slightly askew, like a picture frame hung deliberately askew so your eyes would constantly twitch. "Yes. It's mine," I blurted, fully aware of how childish it sounded but driven by some instinct I couldn't ignore. Her eyes flickered, casting strange, elongated shadows on the ground. A gust of wind wrapped around us, cold like a lover's absent touch in the solitude of night. The air felt thicker, as though teeming with something unseen and intangible. Lisa pursed her lips, a daguerreotype of discontent flashing across her face, and for a disorienting moment, I thought I glimpsed something behind her eyes, a ripple of darkness, an ancient emptiness, that seemed to reach out like tendrils from an abyss. Just for a moment, the fair's noises dimmed, the vibrant colors drained away, and I felt inexplicably hollow, my heart pounded with an urgent pulse echoing inside my head. Her gaze pierced through me, and without words, she somehow commanded an awful dread. "It's just ice cream," she repeated slowly, her voice reverberating like stones skipping across haunted lakes. Her persistence unnerved me, and every fiber of my being screamed that her insistence was far from normal, laced with an unnatural insistence that transcended the simple act of sharing. "No," I replied again, firmer this time, pulling the ice cream cone closer to my chest like an ancient relic warding off unseen evils. Her face, a perfect mask of frustration, twisted momentarily before smoothing back into placid beauty. Yet, her eyes flickered, as if suppressing some arctic ferocity lurking beneath her skin. Time dilated between us, and I swear shadows slithered with malignant cadence across the fraying edges of my perception. "Fine," she said finally, her voice an unexpected melody of defeat, and the shadows retracted, leaving me with the buzzing tension of cicadas and sweltering silence. I expected her to storm away in predictable anger, but instead, she lingered, her smile unwavering, as if she were communing with something that lay between the folds of reality only she could perceive. Something wicked brushed against my consciousness, sly and serpentine, whispering untold truths and promises in a language I couldn't understand. With growing unease, I watched as she turned, retracing our steps, her figure seemingly fading into leaden clouds as she walked away. An oppressive weight lifted, and I inhaled sharply, only then realizing how shallow my breaths had been. I felt no victory, only an unknowable loss as I cradled my rapidly melting solace, dripping unwasted onto the earth. But as Lisa disappeared amidst the throng of swaying bodies, I noticed a curious thing. A chill emanated from her previous presence, frost spread across the ground in her wake, glistening like shattered glass or the teeth of a malevolent winter. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, questioning my sanity. And that night, as I lay in bed, dream sitters perched upon my chest, pressing silence into my broken dreams. She visited me again, countless voids swirling in her ever-demanding eyes, whispering cryptic tendrils of sounds that tugged at the seams of my reality. Over and over, the haunting mantra of "it's just ice cream" rung louder than the tormented wails of long-forgotten souls, and with each reiteration, I grew more convinced that not all who wander through shadows emerge the same, for some shadows carry themselves as invitations to nightmares. It was when I could no longer discern waking moments from the nightmares that took root deep within my slumber that I realized her request was never about the ice cream. It was a test of possession, a sinister key to untold doorways. Now every night, that familiar whisper toys with my sanity, and somehow I know, a simple lick would have bound me there, in her grip, forever enslaved to whatever entities she served. Am I the asshole? Maybe. Or perhaps not, because this was never as sweet and simple as ice cream, was it? When the shattering of glass echoed through our cramped living room, it wasn't just the vase that broke. It was the thin facade I had been holding onto for months. Sitting there in the dull glow of our flickering TV, surrounded by the remnants of failed dreams and a miscarriage that left me hollow, I stared at my mother, a beacon of possibility holding onto a secret of her own. There was a time I would have thought destiny had a cruel sense of humor, but this went beyond any cosmic jest. I was 28 when the ultrasound technician broke the news. The nursery remained unused, the walls still adorned with soft yellow birds ready to greet a life that never came. My mother, at 52, had shuffled into my room shortly after, her face an unreadable mask, clutching her stomach with a wild disbelief that mirrored my own. "You're going to have a sibling," she had said, as if the weight of her words was something we could both bear. And we, unwilling conspirators in this twisted play, carried on our lives. Beneath the smiles at family gatherings was the gnawing void of a child I never met, and the world wasn't aware of the story blooming in our midst, an impossible pregnancy that seemed more like a fairy tale spun by lunatics than reality. To cope, I nestled into routine, drowning under its predictability until the unexpected visit from Tom, my typically reticent brother. He stood in the doorway, fidgeting, eyes darting like a moth caught in undulating candlelight. "Sarah's pregnant," he blurted, the silence that followed tethered with the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. Here was a tale we dared not even whisper, lest the fragile web of secrets binding us tear apart at the seams. Our parents were away at a doctor visit, leaving us alone to reckon with the strangest luck akin to staring down a cracked, antique mirror reflecting fractured destinies. Every long-forgotten resentment seemed to claw back into our minds, relentless and fervent, unrelated yet entirely connected. I often find myself gazing out the kitchen window at the dusk settling in like a bedraggled stranger making itself at home, pondering why fate chose our family for its sinister experiments. I follow the mundane, yet peculiar rhythms of our household, the scrape of forks against plates, the muffled arguments through thin walls, all while enduring the cacophony of blessings and curses from this supposed stroke of impossible luck. With each passing day, my mother grew rounder, her resilience like a pioneer venturing into the unknown wilderness. And as her due date crept closer, Tom's apprehension swelled, the shadow of his impending fatherhood looming, a specter feeding the desperation in his eyes. The night my mother went into labor, an unseasonable storm raged outside, tearing at her house with icy fingers as if eager to capture any warmth and joy before it could take root. I drove her to the hospital, shooting anxious glances towards the back seat where she panted and grimaced. Memories of my own time in the hospital washed over me, flecking the air with an inescapable déjà vu that settled around us like dust on rarely touched surfaces. I had rehearsed everything I would tell her at that moment, the doubt, the fear, the unyielding sorrow. But instead, the words dissolved, leaving only silence. Then, after hours that seemed like days, my brother's baby joined the world with the same abruptness as the squall outside. We stood at opposite ends of the maternity ward, each enveloped in our own minds' narratives, punctuated only by the cries of new life. Tom couldn't know the turmoil I experienced as I watched him cradling his tiny, wrinkled daughter, a bizarre echo of the joy stolen from me. In the adjacent room, my mother lay holding her newborn son, radiance and exhaustion etched in equal measure across her face. The two halves of my new world collided there under harsh, sterile fluorescent lights, beginnings unimagined, endings I still grieved. Standing at that strange crossroads, I understood the uncanny cycle spinning us all into an uncertain future, this shared, inexplicable dance my family and I stumbled through, where the miscarriage, the new brother, and my brother's child were confusing notes in a song none of us had intended to play. It dawned then like a blade slipping between ribs, that life was stretching around us in its timeless web, pulling strands taut and bringing us to our knees, making us acknowledge a mortality as inescapable as the setting sun outside the window. And so, we stood there, a family reborn through unexplainable means, a daughter who had lost but gained in the most surreal form, a son now a father shadowed by century-old wisdom, and a mother traversing earthly and unearthly boundaries as nonchalantly as a walk in the park. Could this be real? I ponder as the hospital smells fade into the background, overwhelmed by the overpowering scent of new life tempered with a twang of bitterness. Fate had given us wretched uncertainty packaged within miraculous opportunities. As I leave the hospital, squinting against the pre-dawn light, a strange resolution casts its light across my bewildered heart, realizing that our story was merely a new chapter in an endless, unpredictable, and reckless book of life itself. I've always hated Mark. We grew up in the same neighborhood, played on the same soccer team, but to me, he was like a gnarled thorn lodged deep in my side, an ever-present source of irritation who, for some sick reason, thrived on making my life miserable. So when I stumbled upon that Ask Reddit thread, asking what slight inconvenience you would wish upon the person you hate the most for the rest of their lives, a dark glee filled my heart as I read through the comments, but nothing resonated with me like the idea of perpetually slow Wi-Fi. I imagined him agonizing over buffering Netflix shows, video calls lagging just enough to freeze his smug grin in awkward moments, and his attempts to work from home, endless frustration tapping away at his sanity. Then it hit me, what if I took it a step further? I dug deeper into the lore of curses. In our age of digital interconnectedness, I decided to find solace in the invisible, the untraceable, and the haunting power of suggestion. I found an online forum hidden in the depths of the dark web, featuring dubious accounts of rituals that promised to lay burdens that could corrode happiness. I laughed at the absurdity of it, but something primal within me began to stir as I read about a curse of gradual inconvenience. I decided to conduct a little experiment. Using my laptop, I typed out my intention to bind Mark to endless inconvenience, proclaiming it like a mantra, feeding the insatiable resentment with every keystroke, and click after click, I submitted my request into the void. That week, I noticed odd happenings in Mark's life. His car inexplicably broke down, his favorite coffee shop was out of his beloved scone every morning, and the packages he ordered would arrive 2 days late, each occurrence adding fuel to my twisted satisfaction. The taste of sweet revenge coursed through my veins as Mark's world became a series of small, irritable moments that I could almost feel reverberate with my own malicious energy. But then I began receiving ominous replies on the forum, strange messages that taunted me, reminding me that every action has a consequence. I brushed it off, not wanting to acknowledge the creeping dread seeping through my thoughts, but even as I relished watching Mark's life deteriorate into a series of unfortunate events, I started experiencing minor inconveniences myself, keys misplaced, traffic jams at every turn, and the labyrinthine lines at the grocery store where I seemed to select the slowest checkout lane each time. At first, I chalked it up to uncanny coincidence, but soon it escalated to full-blown chaos. My phone would crackle with static when mourning the loss of my favorite show. My computer would crash without warning right as I finished important projects. Emails would go missing, leaving me in a quagmire of frustration that mirrored Mark's. It was as if the curse was slipping from my grasp and circling back to my life, and just when I thought it couldn't get worse, my childhood nemesis became aware of my distress. He reached out to me, cryptic messages laced with confusion and almost pity. He was experiencing the strain of his own life's misfortunes, which only intensified my paranoia. I felt trapped in this cyclical madness, my attempts to pull back from the curse proving futile as it tightened its grip like an illicit vice. As weeks passed, the inconveniences morphed into something sinister. I caught glimpses of shadows darting through the periphery of my vision, whispers tantalizing my consciousness at night when I should have been resting, and a nagging feeling that Mark was unwittingly connected to this spiral downwards. Even my sleep became punctuated by vivid nightmares, scenarios where every inconvenience I wished upon him manifested in my life tenfold, complex labyrinths of delays trapping me like a rat in an ever-tightening maze. One evening, after yet another day of horror, my internet went down during a critical presentation, I stood outside staring at the neighborhood as an unsettling realization clawed its way to the surface. Mark was not just a detached rival anymore, but a mirror reflecting my own dark intent. Perhaps by wishing for his suffering, I unknowingly invited my own. Desperate answers rooted deep within the recesses of the forum dug up a last-ditch ritual that promised to sever ties with malignant energies. However, it came at a cost. I was instructed to confront Mark, face him in person and, upon revealing my malicious intentions, offer to lift the curse, granting him an unexpected boon. The thought of looking into his eyes, to admit my deep-seated hatred, immediately terrifying yet exhilarating. So, I called him, the phone trembling in my grip as I reluctantly ventured into his neighborhood, my heart pounding harder with each passing streetlight. When I arrived, knocking on that familiar door felt like cracking open a long dormant hell. The door swung open, and Mark stood there, bewildered but strangely calm. After the initial awkwardness faded, I feigned the casual air of someone wanting to catch up, but the words poured out of me as if my tongue was a runaway train. I told him everything, the curse, my hatred, my obsession, how I never wanted to admit that I had become the architect of my own misery. To my shock, he listened intently, his eyes widening not with anger, but with what I could only interpret as understanding, a twisted recognition of how the wounds of our childhood had interconnected like vines, choking the life from both of us. He spoke then, his voice steady as he revealed the toll of my actions. He quipped that he had sensed something vile brewing behind his trifling inconveniences. Yet as we stood in that dimly lit entryway, I saw the shadows coil around us, the weight of the curse lingered in the air, both of us locked in this grotesque acknowledgement that we were bound together in our shared hatred, like two characters cursed by an unseen puppeteer. We agreed to end it right there, a pact forged in the fragile air of a shared conversation. I left his house that night with a sense of catharsis, believing I had narrowly escaped the clutches of the curse, believing that I could flush the bitterness out of my life, but as the sun set behind me, a perpetual shroud of dread fell upon my soul. My phone buzzed incessantly with the same messages I had received earlier, but this time they were accompanied by images, of Mark's face twisted in anguish. I glanced at the time, and it struck me, the last inconvenience had taken root, and with it, the realization that the curse had no intention of relinquishing its hold. My life spiraled out of control. It became clear that this was only the beginning. Bit by bit, troubling echoes of discontent chased me into the shadows, calling out my name as if to say I had woven my own fate into the fabric of someone else's torment. Every rage-induced thought I'd sent into the void had returned tenfold, curses crystallizing to form the prison I now inhabited, and each day felt like another chapter in a never-ending nightmare where Mark's inconveniences were now my own, and the slight was no longer separate from me but fused with every part of my being, inviting me to wonder, was I the puppet? Or merely the marionette left to dance on their strings? When I first saw the Ask Reddit thread titled "Those Who Currently Work in U.S. Federal Government, What's the Mood Like?" I ignored it. I had my own misconstrued visions of bureaucratic monotony that seemed too cliché, yet there was something in the way people responded that gnawed at the back of my mind, an unsettling undercurrent that spoke more than just the everyday discontent of long hours spent behind trading desks or in dimly lit offices. Curiosity got the better of me, and I ventured into the labyrinth of their responses. A cacophony of different voices, some disillusioned, others terrified, pulling me deeper into the minds of those who served at the heart of the nation's power. One commenter, a nameless voice lurking behind the veil of anonymity, mentioned a quiet dread that had crept through the hallways of government buildings, describing how employees whispered in hushed tones about something dark looming just beyond their reach, a vague threat that seemed to swell with every passing day. It spoke of a night shift worker who found himself under the flickering fluorescent lights of an empty hallway. He stammered about reports of missing documents, only to culminate in a chilling tale of finding a sealed envelope stamped with a misclassified clearance level that contained not just innocuous paperwork but peculiar sketches of buildings and what seemed like shadowy figures, suggesting surveillance that extended beyond their comprehension. I couldn't shake this voice from my mind as I spent the following days obsessively revisiting the thread, quickly approached by others sharing similar experiences. An intern who claimed she overheard a conversation about a secret department conducting experiments disguised as community outreach, a mid-level administrator warning about frequent power outages that left parts of the building submerged in darkness, only for unsettling whispers to fill the air, as if shadows carried conversations with the unseen. I'd continue scrolling, captivated yet horrified, particularly drawn to a user claiming to be a research analyst, who likened the atmosphere to a sinking ship, the fear palpable, growing wildly infectious as employees avoided eye contact, their expressions haunted, as if some shared trauma had conspired to sap them of their humanity. His comments became increasingly erratic, references to a department that never existed, codes that didn't look like government standard, and strange symbols tattooed beneath the skin of government employees who had been chosen to carry out an agenda most didn't understand. Then there was the post that set my skin crawling, describing how, one evening, this analyst found himself working late and stumbled upon a janitor who was tasked with throwing away files from a containment unit. The janitor, face pale, muttered something about the watchers and hurried away, leaving behind a slip of paper with a list of forgotten names, all eerily familiar to the analyst, people who had gone missing under mysterious circumstances, with no official records of their existence. As the days passed, the thread became a rabbit hole where sanity and stifling fear intertwined in a tapestry of paranoia, culminating in a new post alleging that several government workers had started reporting vivid nightmares of a dark arm reaching through the cracks of their consciousness, distorting reality, embodying their forbidden secrets and guilts. Every night they would wake drenched in sweat, with that vague sense of dread seeping into their bones. Mindlessly awakening from these visions where they exchanged hushed whispers in an echoing room that stank of mildew, mingling excitement with dread, feeding the horror but feeling invigoratingly alive, desperate souls grasping for a fleeting reprieve in the heart of a government that had become a breeding ground for the bizarre. I shivered, knowing I should close the thread, but that suffocating curiosity tethered me to the screen, unable to silence the growing doubt as I found my own pulse quickening with every new revelation. Then something peculiar occurred. A formidable user claiming to be an insider dropped a bombshell, a haunting message that resonated deep within me, stating that someone was watching, that they operated from within, disguised as government officials, but were anything but. The existential dread peaked when threads started disappearing one by one, posts vanishing without warning or explanation, leaving only traces in the comments before they too evaporated into the ether, as if reality itself was conspiring to bury the truth. My heart raced, and I could feel the atmosphere thicken, rippling with something sinister. The final response from the insider hinted toward a planned emergency meeting, warning that no one should attend, culminating in an eerie countdown, a haunting suggestion enveloped in foreboding. I finally shut my laptop, the hushed whispers of that communal uncovering echoing in my thoughts as I forced myself to sleep, the weight of those reflections haunting my dreams. Yet, moments into the night, I jolted awake to the sound of my phone vibrating insistently beside me. It was a text, simple yet terrifying. Unread number, just a lone message. They know you're reading. The hairs on my arms prickled as goosebumps cascaded down my spine. I felt like prey in a predator's gaze, and as I bolted up to look through the window, I saw a shadow standing across the way, a dark figure silhouetted against the moonlight, watching, waiting, its intent cloaked in obscurity, making it clear that whatever horror had infected the government was now beckoning just outside the confines of my reality, and I realized with a sinking feeling in my gut that I didn't just read about fear. I had become part of the fear, and now there was nowhere to run.